preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Thank you very much. Mary Miss has been working since the late 1960s and evolving pieces which deal with site orientation. She was educated at the University of California at Santa Barbara in 1962 to 66, where she received a Bachelor of Arts, and then went on to the Reinhardt School of Sculpture at Maryland Art Institute. Mary has really redefined the nature of sculpture, redefined the activity of making objects in a place, doing so in so many instances in recent years with the collaborative efforts of landscape architects, designers, and architects, really bringing to a new sense of meaning, at least in the 20th century, of what art and public art might be. Mary is going to show a sequence of slides. I'm going to just move right on to have her talk about those works, and then we'll talk about them together. Thank you very much for coming. And I hope that your trip to visit Mary Miss will be balanced by another trip downtown to see a remarkable project, which she'll talk about toward the end of her slides, at Battery Park City. Mary.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Patterson. I'm going to be showing you slides starting from the early 70s and coming up through more recent work. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly so that there can be time for discussion at the end between Patterson and I. That's a format that people don't often use, and I think it's a very interesting one. As Patterson had indicated, one of my main interests has been with redefining public art, or trying to make it a viable area of investigation. Finding ways that artists can step outside of the framework of the museum and gallery system and into the real world, so to speak. There was a play that I saw this summer, maybe some of you saw it as well, called The Road to Mecca by Athol Fugard. And I've liked his writing and his plays for a long time, and I went to see this one. And as it went on, I was a little bit surprised because it didn't have kind of the maybe the roughness that I was used to in some of his other work. But it was about a woman in a small village, Afrikaner community, and she was probably in her late 60s or something. And after the death of her husband a number of years before, she had started to make objects and put them in her front yard. And this was all based on this imagining that she was having or doing about what Mecca was like. She'd read about it briefly someplace, and she started to imagine this place. And it became this fantastic scene for her of, with mirrors and reflections. And out of that vision and her imagining what that place was like, she started to create this series of strange beings out of concrete and steel, and as I said, put them in the yard. At the point that we come into the exhibition, or to the play, the people are tired of having this exhibition in the community, and they're trying to get her out of her house into a nursing home, and at last have another clean yard in the neighborhood. And by the end of the play, I really found it to be so moving, because what it was about was the failure of imagination. And the implication was that in this case, some of the problems in South Africa are really, as much as anything, about a failure of imagination. And I think that that's one of the things that motivates me to do what I'm doing, to try and find a way to get the investigations of artists outside of the enclosure of the museum or the gallery. There's nothing wrong with having them in that context, but I think that the that these imaginings, these investigations can be affecting more than the limited number of people that see the work in those institutions. This path that I've taken outside the regular gallery routes or art business routes has been a very interesting one for me. It's taken me someplace between architecture and landscape architecture and engineering and, many different disciplines, all of which I've had to kind of learn as I've gone along. But I think architecture is the one that I keep bumping into regularly. I work with architects a lot on collaborations, and it's a very compelling field of endeavor, I guess you could call it, for me, because it's as though we were involved in a process of map making, both with the architects and as an artist trying to find this new role within the society. But you have rumor that there were once trails or paths through this unmarked area. But at this point, there are prominent signs posted at the edge that say, beware, artists, if you try and enter this zone, your ideas are going to be taken over or watered down. And there are signs warning the architects to beware because the artists are going to try and invade their territory and take it over. But in spite of all of these prominently posted signs of the dangers of the area, it seems to be worthy of investigation. It seems to be a map that's worth making. And the kind of layering that goes on, the meeting of areas of investigation is a very interesting and compelling one to me. If we could turn off the lights and start with the slides, please. This is a piece that was done in the early 70s at Battery Park City in Lower Manhattan, before anything was built. A series of 5 wooden boards that are about 12 feet wide and 6 feet high were put up with these large circles cut out. You really couldn't see the work until you walked around to the front of it. And then the piece materialized, as you saw in that first slide, with that column of air descending into the ground. As we go through these things, I'm going to just try and point out some of the ideas that we're developing rather than speak at length about the specific pieces, because to come to this notion of an art that's integrated into our environment, that people have access to, I wasn't able to arrive with these notions complete, ready-made in my mind, but they developed slowly over a period of many years. So in this case, the importance of the viewer having to move around the piece rather than being able to just look at it from 1 or 2 positions was really important, because when you walked in and saw these rough boards from the side, they were just boards, and it wasn't until you stood at the front that you could really see the work. This is another piece that was done about this time, about 7 feet square and 3.5 feet deep. It's kind of it looks as though the grass has been removed, revealing an understructure that might continue out through the rest of the lawn. One of the things that was interesting to me in this case was that you could make something that was rather compelling, that would draw one's attention to it, but it wasn't a monolithic form. I was very curious about how the bulk could kind of be stripped away from things, and how you could do things that weren't monolithic or monumental in their nature, but were very affecting. A work that was done in Greenwich, Connecticut, on the grounds of the Greenwich Country Day School. it was way back in the woods. You had to go across a playing field and through a pine forest, and I built a little bridge so that you could ford the stream. And then you came on this structure in a very overgrown area. It's called Sunken Pool, and once you got up to the edge of it, you found that there was water contained on the inside. And the inside was very shiny, reflective galvanized steel, so that if the sun was shining, it would, kind of sparkle off that drum and the water. But it was a very still place in the midst of that dense growth. I think that you can see that as I'm doing these investigations and building things, I'm borrowing very much from the imagery of our built environment, whether they're construction sites or, all kinds of building things that are going on. This piece was done in upstate New York, Lewiston, New York, at Art Park, and it was done as a set for a film. In this case, I wanted to make something that was very compelling physically, but I wanted to show it as more, in a way, show more than you could see as a viewer at ground level. So with this work, which is about this central section that you first saw was about 20 feet across, but 140 feet from one edge to the other, in the film, the camera starts rotating and you see just the gravel and steel, and finally you get up and you see the landscape out each of the troughs. But then it switches to a very close view of this target-like form and then moves to this distant view. The image pulls away, so that you've gone from the very inside of something to the very exterior. A sense of physicality in an experience of place and space has been one of the things that's been most important to me to investigate in these pieces that I've been doing over the years. I was doing these as temporary works. This piece that I'm about to talk about now was also temporary. I would do them with small grants from an institution or the New York State Council on the Arts. I would get friends to help me build them. This was done at the Nassau County Museum, and there were 3 tower-like structures. You see 2 there, an underground structure, and the mounds in the center. The title of this was Perimeters, Pavilions, and Decoys. This is about 16 feet square, the opening of this structure with a ladder. You go down underneath, and you are able to walk under the ground that you've just crossed. You can see there that edge that you've just come across. You walk back under and can go into an opening on each of the sides. There's a corridor that goes around behind that wall with further openings on the back wall, so that you look into a dark space, but you can't really see the limits of it. So there's this question about how far the ground that you've just walked across is undermined. And so there's something rather mysterious about the edges of this piece, but it's also a very still and quiet place. As you first come into the field, you see these tower-like structures, and the first one is about 18 feet tall, and you can climb up the inside of it or go on to the next one, and you find that it's just the same, although it had appeared to be just a copy of the first tower. This one is only 15 feet tall, and going on to the third, you find that it's only 6 feet square and 12 feet tall. So again, it was very important that the viewer was moving through this space and looking, finding out what was really going on. You couldn't just assume that you knew all of the sizes and dimensions of this thing ahead of time. As I was doing this, it was a county museum, but most of the people who came there really weren't there to look at the art. They were there for picnics. And it was interesting for me to start noticing this public, because up to this point, these were investigations that I wanted to do because I was interested in the way the form could be integrated into the landscape. I was interested in really more formal investigations, not just formal. The feeling of the thing was very important, but this new element that I began to be aware of, the public and the public's response, was a very interesting one. People came here, spent time at the site. If you went up to them and said, this is a sculpture, they would get upset because it wasn't a man on a horse, wasn't cast in bronze, it wasn't what they had expected art to be or what sculpture would be. If that kind of identification wasn't made, they were quite engaged with the work. They would spend time, all the kids would climb the towers, people would go down, sit in that sunken court. So I became more aware of what the audience was for the work that I was doing. I was also interested in the way you assembled information. In other words, that I was kind of remembering things that I saw as a kid growing up, traveling a lot, especially in the western part of the United States, where you would stop at a historical site, but rather than have it, marked by grand ruins, there would just be very modest remains of an old fort or a parade ground or the wells of this marked site. And as you walked around, you really had to invent the place for yourself. So that's something that I've continued to think about with these works, is how the viewer makes the place for himself or herself. This is a work that was done in Dayton, Ohio, for the city of Dayton, and it was built by the Dayton Parks Department. It was an important piece to me, again, in a couple of ways. None of these pieces are thought up ahead of time. I go to the site, find things about that site that particularly interest me, and develop the works from those early visits that I make. And so with this piece, I went and saw some of the old locks in the vicinity of Dayton, on the old canals, some old garden structures, and really tried to use that vocabulary that people of the community were familiar with in developing this work. Its title is Staged Gates, and it's about 50 feet wide in the first case. And the gateway kind of forms a proscenium for these backdrops of the additional gates that are really meant to be an introduction to the woods, to take you into this little park. This was very important, though, as well as finding a way to develop the idea for the site, finding a way to get something built using the City Parks Department. I came with my plans, and the carpenters, who were usually building picnic tables and picnic shelters, built this work for me, and were quite skeptical at the beginning, but by the end were the biggest supporters of the piece, and who were the ones who made sure that it was maintained over the years. I haven't been back recently, but they took very good care of it and a kind of personal interest in it. This is the first permanent work that I built, which was done in the early 1980s. So the first 12 years or so, starting in the late 60s, that I was doing things, the pieces were put up and taken down. I should add that I had a very traditional education in sculpture, studying bronze casting and marble carving. But at a certain point, I started to build rather modest structures, small interior works, that were defining a use of material, that were kind of, as I said, cutting away the bulk of the structure. They ended up getting a little bit larger and a little bit, more extended in the landscape, until we see this piece, which is on about 4.5 acres. In this case, I was really very interested in the situation at hand, which is this is a 700-acre campus just south of Chicago, Governor's State University. But it's a clump of buildings with parking lots around the buildings. Nobody ever goes out into this very beautiful landscape that's surrounding them. And so I decided that in this area that looks perfectly flat, that I would build this mound and try and get people's attention, to get them to take note of that area and step out into it. A lot of the pieces that I do are about trying to get people to notice things that they pass by regularly without taking note of. Also, there were posts that I put in the field going from one end to the other, and they're about 4.5 feet high, going to 20 feet high. So right from the edge, before you step into the field, you notice that this land that looks so flat actually has quite a drop-off from one end to the other. And hopefully you get your interest piqued enough to get out to the center and find the 60-foot square sunken courtyard with ladders that go down into it. There are the towers that can be climbed if you want to see the piece. There's also a tower that goes down into the center. It's been built like a step well so that the center opening always has water in it. If there's been a lot of rain, the gridded area fills up, or then also the additional next square. But as I've gone back to visit a few times, the piece has ended up acting or working in a way that I had in mind, in that it's regularly used by people coming out, spending time between classes, giving people a way to get out into that landscape or an excuse to move out into it. This shows you how close you are to that, the school, but then you have this other, endless landscape in the other direction. A work that was done for the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid. Again, trying to focus on something in the natural environment. This piece is called Veiled Landscape, and I thought of it almost as like a postcard framing of that very beautiful, distant Adirondack view. Once you stood up on the platform, though, you had that almost veil of wire mesh in front of you. And one of the things that I was hoping to be able to do was to get people off the platform and out into the landscape. I built the piece on an existing cut where a water line had been laid. So there's a path that goes about 1 mile straight down in front of this piece. As you move down, there's a curtain of posts separating you from the view, and some fences. And finally, you get to this gateway, which is about 20 feet high and 60 feet wide. And it's really an introduction to the landscape. So the focus for me wasn't so much on the structures themselves, but on the structures as providing an introduction. I am often using historical information, references. I go to see as many different kinds of structures, from visiting Machu Picchu to looking at the old tobacco warehouses in Lexington, Kentucky, to construction sites. I think that the thing that I'm most interested in is finding spaces, structures that are compelling, and trying to find a way of integrating them into our own environment. I'm going to show you a few proposals. All the things that I think about and work on don't get built. This is something that was proposed for 42nd Street, for the 42nd Street Development Corporation. And there's a small space between buildings, two buildings, between 9th and 10th Avenues. And in proposing a work to go there, I decided that I would draw on the imagery that I find most compelling in New York City, and that is, again, construction sites, which you can always look at through a little maybe hole in a wooden wall, but you can never enter. So I proposed this work that was made of wire mesh fencing with walkways that circle around a sunken pool and then take you up to an elevated viewing place in the back of the area. I made it all of wire mesh because I knew that any place you are in the city, you always want to see who else is there with you. On 42nd Street, I would presume nobody would actually step off the street at night. I wouldn't anyway. So I decided to light it very dramatically. This is in a row of small theaters just to the other side. And the image was interesting to me to try and make this as though the facade of one of the theaters had been removed so that you were seeing a stage set. This is a work that's going to be built in the next year in Washington, in Seattle, behind a hospital. There's on the University of Washington campus, there's a green glade area which can be seen from all of the visiting rooms of the hospital. They overlook this site. So I decided to build something or to make something. There was a very modest budget in this case, but I wanted to make something that that had some mystery to it, but also would change its appearance. And what this would consist of there's a curved walkway there and some kind of curving bench-like areas that would be covered with grass, but the shiny element that you see in the middle would be concrete slabs with a lip around the edge. And since, as somebody was saying earlier, it does rain in Seattle, when it rains, the water is going to be contained on each of those slabs so that it takes on a very different look with the reflection of the water than on the days when it's dry. And a proposal for a project that may not be built for the San Jose Convention Center. It was a project built by Mitchell Jurgala, and you see the kind of shape of his building surrounding this site. It's very much a leftover site, the kind of thing that artists are often given. We're I think, seen as being giant Band-Aids in some cases, able to heal any difficult problem. And I found it to be a very unattractive space, but as I worked on it and looked at it, I ended up developing something that was almost like a self-contained island, that as you walked through it, you would be going from one complex experience to another, different kinds of seating areas and pathways. But I do spend a lot of time developing things that go off the track before they're built. This is something that was done at the Fogg Museum at Harvard. And as opposed to these large-scale outdoor pieces that you've been seeing, I've been consistently doing smaller, often interior pieces that allow me to investigate ideas, develop vocabulary, and are, very interesting to me. This is one that people could look at, but they couldn't step on because of the Fogg's insurance policies. So it ended up having a rather strong visual complexity to it. All these stairways that you could see but couldn't walk on. And also, it was kind of like a stage set in the middle of this very beautiful neoclassical courtyard. A piece that was done in London a few years ago is something like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. You can walk from one part to the next, to the next. And finally, when you get to the inside, there are these stepped trays that have sand. If it was built as a real or a permanent structure, I was imagining them as being trays of water. And again, in London last year, I built a work which I thought of as an urban locator. And it was an interesting thing for me to go back to the situation that I had kind of tried to stay away from. And that is that artists are usually offered a concrete pad in front of a building and asked to do something. And I've always said, no, I'm not going to use that space. I want to go off someplace else. But I was curious to see what might be done in an urban location that would provide some relief within that setting. This is on Bedford Square, on a corner of Bedford Square, which has a beautiful central park, oval park in the middle, but it's one of those English parks where you have to have the key to get in, so there's no place, there's really no stopping place. And so I decided to make an alternative stopping place within this square. And to show you another type of work that I've been doing over the years, as I said, I started out doing interior works, and I've kept doing them all the time. It's where I work out a lot of my ideas and develop them again. This is something from the mid-'70s. It was a structure that you could walk into, but of course you could only go so far. It was about 20 feet long. Another one from the later 70s where there's a contained space which is behind that screen that you can't really see the end of. And this was done before the underground courtyard that I showed you earlier, where I was telling you that there was a wall where you really couldn't see behind that wall. And this is another piece that was done for a show at the Guggenheim, and it has that same kind of inaccessible space, contained space. Something that's interested with me with these interior works as I've developed them is how you can really attach them, make them almost like interior additions. And that investigation has taken me to looking at things like room dividers, or window-like openings. And as I've done these things, it's not so much the idea of making something functional that interests me, but really speaking to the content of the idea of window or of doorway. This door is called door mask. It doesn't open just once, but opens again and again and again. Or this passage that's also a doorway. Instead of going through a door once, your sense of passage is drawn out, extended. And this is a piece that was done for an exhibition, and it was the entry to the gallery. You walked around either side to get into the exhibition. It's called Arrivals and Departures, 100 Doors. And there are 4 major doors with then many more doors within, so that each section has 25 doors, making 100 in all, with mirrors in between. And it ends up looking like there are probably 400 doors in it. And a work that's built in the entryway of a small museum outside of Boston, the Danforth Museum. It's a very modest, I think, elementary school that's been converted to a museum. And I wanted to try and make something that made this a special experience to walk into the museum, coming into that entryway. So I put a structure up into the ceiling and then another onto the floor. There's a large copper disc that's fit into the ceiling. Then with these layers, the last layer is a mirror, a mirrored surface. And then the floor piece has a mirror as well. And when you look from one to the other, you get this kind of endless reflection. I think I was saying to someone earlier, the thing that interests me so much is the possibility in working as an artist that you don't end up just doing your signature piece, your painting or your sculpture that's always the same size, that's always recognizable. What I'm really finding to be so interesting is the notion of affecting a space or a place, and so that anybody who walks into it is having a very particular experience of that place. So I'm as interested in looking at door handles as I am at looking at an urban plan, but I love to have that leeway of moving and looking at all of these possibilities. This is a work that was done a few years ago for the St. Louis County Park, Laumeier Park. And this is just gives you an overview of what the site is like, because it's a difficult one to see. I was asked to do a piece for the park and walked through it and found this strange undulating concrete structure, which turned out to be an old pool. And then I used that almost as people use found objects in sculpture. I'm using this as a found site. I took the remains of some old pavilions that had been bathing houses and things around the pool and built my structures on top of those existing ones. So this is a notion that's really interested me over the years, and this is one of the first times I was really able to accomplish it. But of using found elements and building further into them. And what I've done is added seating areas, lookouts, walkways. This is an area that is near a lot of light industry, and people come here at lunchtime to spend an hour or two. So it's very heavily used. But all of these structures are surrounding this very strange organic form in the midst of the woods. I think that one of the things that's most interesting to me, though, is the notion of memory, and how you can draw on things that are familiar to people that they are able to associate with when they're looking at a structure you're building. But then by your use of that structure, the place that you're making, they're taking the memory of that place away with them. So you're kind of playing both sides of the memory, but hopefully it will be affecting things that they're seeing in the future. And then this is the site of Battery Park City, where I've done this piece that Patterson mentioned earlier. And this is what it looks like, or looked like 5 years ago before I started. The very first slide that I showed you of the circles descending into the ground was actually done right on this site, and that is the cutout, the rectangular cutout down there is called the South Cove. I worked on this with Stanton Exted, who had done the master plan for Battery Park City, and Susan Child, a landscape architect. And together we developed this project for this 2.5-acre waterfront park. As we started working on it, we kind of switched off in as far as who took the lead at what point. But one of the things Stan felt very strongly about is that the existing esplanade should be continued in some way through this park. I, on the other hand, wanted something that was very different than what was happening on the esplanade. But what we did end up doing was finding the areas of agreement, the things that we both felt strongly about. And one was that we wanted people to be able to really have a feeling of the water and direct access to the water, which is something that almost never happens in New York, especially down in this area. For years, the West Side Highway's been separating you from the water, and then the piers have been very derelict. So no one could get to them without almost risking their lives. So we started with this notion of juxtaposing this very organic grove of trees with the structured hard edge of the cove. And the termination here is this jetty structure that goes out in the water. Also, you see water on the land side, and actually there's water 40 feet back under the whole edge of the cove. That's one of the things that I found out when I first started talking to the engineers about the site. So we decided to take the cover off that platform, revealing water on the land side, and then we built another piece out into the water, that island structure that you see that's planted. And along the edge here, we built a rock edge that suggested something of what a river's edge might have been like before, and provided this lookout tower so that you could actually get up and look over that cutout and the juxtaposition between the land and the water. In the upper area, there's a grove of honey locust trees that's very sensuous and lush, and hopefully provides a real relief from the kind of density of Lower Manhattan that's, the Wall Street area that's just behind. I think that one of the things that was most important for me in this working on this project was finding out whether it was going to be possible to build something and end up with it having the kind of potency at the end that I find necessary as an artist when I make a work. Or would it just get watered down? Would you lose the idea after all of the committee meetings and all of the contractors coming in and everybody, putting their 2 cents in about what needed to be changed for safety reasons or code reasons? And at night, there are a very dense blue light that reflects in the water and marks this out as a separate place. But after the 4 years that it took working on this project, I felt that we had managed to make a place that was very special, that allowed people to have access to the water's edge in Manhattan in a way that isn't possible anyplace else. So this idea about collaboration that I'd been talking about for a long time really turned out to be, to me, a very viable area of endeavor and investigation. So I think maybe we'll stop here and have Patterson come out and we'll talk for a while.
Of the Battery Park City project, Mary, do you sometimes feel that there's a kind of loss of ego? So many people will experience that piece and not know that you made it.
Darn. I don't know. It's so amazing to get to make a permanent waterfront piece, park in New York City, that my ego is so gratified. If you think I'm egoless, you're wrong. No, it was just a marvelous thing to have a chance to, have something that people could have access to. And I'm showing you a lot of slides and telling you that the most important thing is that you can walk around it and see it for yourself. But most of these pieces were gone after 6 months or a year. And to have something that's there that people can walk through and experience and put together for themselves is really important. But I know what you're asking, and that is, you don't see the Mary Miss part, piece there, and people still come to me and say, which part is yours? And I can't separate it out because we were working so closely together in developing the project. But, somehow that ends up not being the most important thing, that you've got that signature piece there that people can identify.
Now, as we've discussed the making of this piece before, we said how significant it was probably that you lived so close by. And you said that the one adjective that would perhaps best describe the relationship you had with so many of the workers on this piece was that you were, quote unquote, relentless. Could you talk about some of your relentlessness in relation to this project?
I think it's probably the head of Battery Park City who would have come up with that definition of me, or that description of me by the end. I had really a very good working relationship with the people who were the workers who were building the project. And I think that was very well established right in the beginning, because one of the first things that was done after the main, infrastructure was put in is that we laid the rock edge, and I was lucky enough to do it with a wonderful older man, a mason named Walter Lawler, who is a legend among all of the construction trades. Everybody's worked with him at some time or another. And Walter and I and a crane operator laid the rock edge in a 3-week period of time in the summer. And the construction company had allotted 6 men, a crane, and 2 months to do this job. And we did it in 3 weeks. And we just went down there every day and we worked and got it done very quickly. And by the end of that, it was okay. I could walk on the site. Nobody was making fun of me anymore. Walter had somehow secured credibility for me in the place. And the construction people were delighted because we had saved them a fortune. So this was a good start to the project. I could go down there and people were constantly coming to me and saying, why don't you come over and look at this detail, Mary? Do you like the way we're doing this? It was really quite wonderful, and I found that if you took an interest in what these people were doing, they were really delighted that somebody was taking that kind of interest and would go out of their way to let you know what was going on. But there was this constant, checking and looking, and things would come up that had to be corrected. And at a certain point, there is a difference between an artist's attitude toward a project like this and an architect's attitude. And there was a big discussion because there was a hoop fence that had been put in the drawings that actually looked all wrong once it was installed in the park. It was to keep the dogs out of the planting. And it took me about 5 months to get this hoop fence removed. And Sandy Fruscier said to me at a certain point, he said, I think I could have worked out a deal with somebody else, but you never would compromise on this. And I said, that's right, Sandy. You can't make something, can't make a work of art if you're going to be compromising. So we got rid of them finally.
Let's talk for a second about a collaborative project that you can realize without compromise. How do you work with 2 or 3 other people and never compromise?
Well, I guess, first of all, you have to be rather stubborn and insistent about what you want, which might sound contradictory, that if you have that attitude. But, there has to be this desire to really get something that is potent and powerful. I described it in one sense as being, if you can't agree with somebody about a direction that's being investigated, you go into another track and follow that investigation. And if that one doesn't work, you try another track. And if that doesn't work, you leave and go and work on another project, and you just realize this isn't a workable situation. But the thing that I really like about it, I don't see it as compromising when I'm doing these things, because to me, it's almost like if you could imagine the way somebody might choose different colors or different objects, if they're a sculptor, how they're going to, or how somebody's going to work images together. I'm really interested in what happens when you've got different ideas coming from different people and how you end up manipulating them and overlaying them, and what can, how you can take this very complex situation and make it come out to be more than you could have had before you started out on your own. That's the secret. It's not something that's less, that's watered down. It's something that's more at the end.
The work that you saw tonight in the slides is really radical work. It really is work that wasn't like any sculpture that was made for really several centuries in art. It involves a level of collaboration. It involves an interaction for public spaces, which really is novel and really does, as you think in your own minds of the history of 20th century sculpture, take us to places we haven't been before. Would you say, Mary, that what you've done in terms of public art, and you're amongst a group of artists who have been working in this way and really reinventing notions of public space, is something that is a long-term shift in the way we're going to look at works of art, or a kind of terminal trend?
Well, if it's terminal, it's going to have to go to the end of my lifetime, however long that's going to be. It's going to be drawn out. It's not going to be a quick termination. I think it's just the beginning of an area of endeavor that is too compelling and too fascinating to stop anytime soon. It's just... I think that we're just beginning to see what the possibilities are. For so long, the term public art was a laughable idea. It was somebody who made a big steel thing and put it out in front of a building, and it ended up being a little bit like a dangling earring on the building or something like that, just a decoration. And to find a way to make things that are integrated into the building process, to make things that give space, a kind of breathing room, place for reflection, a place to stop, a way of looking at things, providing a way of looking at things that's not about reading a sign. It's not about that kind of instant image of advertising or television or media communication. It's a different kind of experience, and it's what we regularly see when we're looking at paintings or sculptures in museums, but it's not something we're used to seeing on the street, that you can stop and notice that there's something there that has a shadow behind it, another meaning behind it. It's not something that can only be taken in at a glance. So I think it should keep going on and on.
Like many people interested in contemporary sculpture, on this visit to New York, I visited the Donald Judd exhibition at the Whitney Museum. Wonderful and interesting show by a remarkable artist. And in talking to the curator of that exhibition afterwards, she informed me that Donald Judd has, in a very real way, in a serious way, moved to designing buildings as well as making his own works of sculpture. This was a rather surprising fact to me, made less surprising when I put it in kind of connection with something that Mary has told me, which is that she too is involved in building buildings, and in fact has just taken on the possibility of a project of designing a house with an architect in St. Louis. Could you talk about that and what that kind of a project means to you?
Well, I think that the thing that I really relish is the lack of a good term to describe what I do, that I'm between, these various fields of endeavor that I've described, and I really like staying in that crevice between things. I've found that it really allows me a lot of flexibility. But I like venturing into the territory regularly in different ways. And in this case, there's a very wonderful site on a bluff looking over the Missouri River. And this man had asked me if I would be interested in working on the design of the house. And in the course of working on another project, I have been working with an architect named Adele Santos, who's in Philadelphia and has been associated with the University of Pennsylvania's architecture department for a long time. And we were working on a project that was a collaboration for an arts center for Albright College in Reading. And it was such an interesting dialogue that we had that as I started thinking about it again, the man's offer to work on this house, I decided it would really be interesting to work with this person who I shared a sensibility with, a vocabulary with. And so we're just in the process of beginning this project. And I know from this other thing that we've worked on that the line between the art and the architecture is never a clear one. And this architect is not at all threatened by that. It's all right if I overlap into the territory that she's working on, or if she comes into the area that I am involved in. So I think it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be about the site, you know, the interior of the house and the outside of the house, how those things are connected. It's going to be a structure that's perched out over this, the edge of this drop off to the river, so it's going to have the kind of physicality that interests me. It's going to have, you know, walkways and probably pavilions off from the main structure of the house. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, what comes out of this.
Clearly yours is an art that is moved beyond commodity, per se. Your works of art can't be resold very routinely. Your works of art exist at a scale that makes even the more portable pieces more appropriate for a museum than they may be for a private collector. How do you feel about being outside of the notion of commodity, which has become such an omnipresent concept in all of our considerations of art in the late 20th century?
I stepped outside of that area rather intentionally in the early 70s, and I have never regretted doing that. I think that it is allowing me a freedom of investigation that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And it's in the commodity world, there's such a limited time span, you know, time of attention that's given to anything. And over the years, I've kind of ended up stepping into this territory that's not controlled or not seen in the same way. Now, there are good things about it and bad things about it, because actually what I'm doing is somewhat outside the art world, the consideration of the art world, because if it can't be reviewed on 57th Street or Soho, it's kind of hard to have the dialogue going on. But that's also the difficulty about it, because I come from an art background. I am an artist. I'm never going to be saying that I'm an architect. Because I really am interested in the ideas of art. And yet, to have serious discussion about those ideas is very difficult. And I think that this area that I'm working in, there are more and more people that are becoming involved in public art, and it's desperately in need of critical dialogue. People are getting away with murder, you know, saying things that are really foolish and doing things that are good and doing things that are terrible, and nobody's there to discuss it because it's so dispersed. You can't send the critic out to review these pieces so easily, because you have to, you know, give that person 10 plane tickets. You know, they can't just have cab fare to or subway fare uptown or downtown. But I don't know what's going to happen to allow a serious consideration of the work. It'll happen in a while, but it's difficult in the meantime. But I think that it's really important to have this this kind of free-ranging area of investigation going on at the same time that there's the kind of hype and pressure of the regular commodity world. I feel that we have a luxury. Those of us who are involved in it have the luxury of this kind of extended and more flexible investigation.
Do you suppose one reason for its flowering is simply because its alternative is so mired in issues that really cause us to experience so many exhibitions as kind of a confrontation with monetary worth?
I mean, it's what is appealing about it to me, whether that many others will find it that way or not. I mean, I'm talking about it as being somewhat ideal. In reality, it's extremely complex and difficult and isn't an area that a lot of people would want to step into, because you end up working with committees and with, the time period for building something can be 1 year, it can be 7 years, it can be, so it's not totally ideal, but it's an alternative way of dealing with issues. And I think that the most important thing is the thing that I was talking about when I first started showing slides this evening. I just think that it's absolutely necessary that the things that artists have to say end up getting out and affecting our culture and our society. I think that, for the artist to kind of stay cloistered and feel powerless to affect the situation, that just has to stop, that we have too much to bring to the situation, to just stay within the limits of that territory that's being defined by the monetary value of the thing.
You've talked on another occasion about wanting to design things or to make things that range from doorknobs to site-specific sculptures. What would you say are the kind of parameters of your ambition? If you were given the opportunity to participate in the design of a new city, is that something that you would welcome?
Oh, yes. I would delight in that. The projects that I've worked on that have involved, investigating urban issues, urban planning, are extremely interesting to me. I really love looking at that broad context, and I love the development of those concepts, of the ideas, as much as I like then getting down to the details. What's the surface of that walkway going to be like that takes you from one side of town to the other? How can you make that different than this boulevard that goes up in another direction? So I think it's really compelling.
Do you think there are other people who have that range of interest in terms of those individuals who are making public sculpture? Or has the way our society functions in so many ways, the actual enactment of these commissions in a way diminished the capacity?
I think that this is really as wonderful as the whole area is, it's really dangerous in some ways too, because as soon as people start talking about public art, people start making rules about how it should be done. And I think that there are, it really worries me that the thing is that the whole area of investigation is going to become so bureaucratized that it won't keep functioning. One of the things that I'm terrified of is to see artists turning into designers. And the thing that I really would hate, now I don't mind if people go down to the South Cove and they can't say that Mary Miss did this or that, but if they go down there and they think that there isn't something unusual happening, then I'm worried. I think it's one of the great dangers of working in this kind of situation is that it's so burdensome, so complex. They try and steamroller you with budgets, with time schedules. There's this constant pressure, and the artist has got to resist and say, no, you can't do that. No, I need the time. And that doesn't mean that you can be unrealistic. You have to, work within certain boundaries, but you've got to get the essence of what you have to offer to come out at the other end. You can't have it, compromised and watered down. And that's something that I see happening that really worries me, that the artist is too willing to take on a role that's just that of another designer in the landscape architect's office or the architect's office. There's a difference. There's a difference in, and all I can describe it as is as there's a difference of spirit, of content, of the kind of information that the artist is layering into the work. And that's what I feel so strongly, has to be maintained.
I really sense that what happened at the South Cove was really kind of a miracle because you and the other artists involved were willing to continue to work at it. I don't know how often that can be achieved, that miracle. I mean, for instance, if you were to get a comparable project in California, would you move to California?
I mean, the question of whether I'd move to California or not is simple by comparison to the question of whether this can happen again. I think what happened at Battery Park is a very exceptional situation. I think it's a very good example of what can happen in communities across the country. But the thing that makes this such an exceptional situation was that there were people there who were willing to really go out on a limb to make sure that the project happened. There was an art committee that worked in conjunction with the Battery Park City Authority. A man named Victor Gans was the head of that art committee. And he was just like a little terrier, he just wouldn't turn loose. I mean, he and I think, made a great pair as far as being relentless. Victor just, worked so hard to make sure that the projects went forward and could happen in their most potent form. So when I would have a meeting with somebody and they would say, oh, we're going to get rid of the island, I'd call Victor up and I'd say, oh my God, Victor, now they want to get rid of this. Or then 2 weeks later, we're going to get rid of the tower. And 5 months later, when all the questions had been resolved, oh, we're going to get rid of the trees. It was kind of endless. But there was somebody there. It wasn't just Victor, it was the whole committee. And now Agnes Gund has taken over Victor's role and is performing that same kind of very important, providing that very important support system that any project has got to have. So in this case, we were all very lucky, those of us who've worked in the Battery Park city situation, to have that kind of support. But any place where anything's going to be done, there's got to be somebody who feels strongly, who can really make that thing happen, or else it won't.
And you believe those opportunities will continue?
Yes, I think so. We'll see. Give me another 5 or 10 years and I'll let you know.
Are there some questions from the audience? Yes.
Can you tell us what the colored surfaces are that you use in the Bedford Square piece and in the piece in the small museum outside of Boston? Those are the only ones I noticed particularly using color. One is outdoors, and so I'm particularly interested in what you're using in outdoor surface. The other looks like tile in the museum. Is that the case?
In the museum, it's some kind of cheap fake tile that's plastic that I found in a hardware store. And outside at Bedford Square, it's wood that's been painted with marine paint. Wood that it was laid out like a jigsaw puzzle, and there were strips of aluminum between.
This raises an issue which I'd like to just ask you about for 1 second. Just to go back to this notion of compromise, so many of the projects you've worked on have been temporary. So many of the projects that you've done have existed in a very powerful but short-term way. What is your feeling when a project comes down?
It's not good. I say that because I for so long, I started building these things in the, around 1966, and until 1981, I really didn't have a permanent one. And that was the governor's estate piece. And I was working so hard. I built them myself. I would get people to help me, but I was the, chief carpenter and excavator and everything. And the thing that was so important was how you moved through them. So now you're seeing all these slides up on the screen, and that experience of looking at the slides has very little to do with what the piece actually looks like. For instance, Laumeier, the project that you've seen out in St. Louis. I mean, you said that you think you can tell what the piece is like through the slides, but I think that's because you've seen the project.
Yeah,
it's actually, I think, probably very difficult to see that. So there was always that frustration that the only way I could show these things was through these photographic documents. So in that sense, I don't like to see the pieces come down. But in another sense, I wish the piece at the Fog was still there. I just loved it, But obviously, the Fog Museum isn't going to give its courtyard over for the next 100 years or so. They nearly croaked having it up for, the 6 weeks that it was there or something. But I was really happy to be able to have that investigation, materialized. So there are things that are really wonderful about the temporary pieces. And, I will always keep doing those temporary things because, as I said, it does allow an investigation that's not possible with the other pieces.
Another question there.
Do you still build any of the pieces yourself? And if you don't, do you miss having the physicality of having hands on?
Can everyone hear the question? Does she miss the physicality of building pieces? In her older pieces, she would build so much of it herself. In a piece such as the piece at Battery Park City, she had to really have the help of numerous other people.
I don't miss being the one who's building them. I mean, it was just, I know I have a friend, George Trackus, who builds pieces that I love very much, and George is just not happy unless he's, knee-deep in mud and working with the arc welder and having a 2x4 balanced on his right shoulder, and, he just really loves it. I was so exhausted by the early 1980s from trying to, balance all those things, continue teaching, doing everything. It was such a relief when I could hire people to do that construction for me. I'm just, George has got a different attitude about it than I do. What I'm less happy about, although it worked out very well for me in Battery Park because I developed a good relationship with the, many of the workers and craftspeople on the job, I don't like having the project really removed in terms of it's going out to bid and somebody else has control over the construction workers. I humored the situation along and I made it work for me. But I really like to have much closer contact and control of the construction process. And that's what I hope to be able to maintain more in the future as I'm proceeding. And I'm trying to find out how to do that. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to be able to do it.
Other questions?
Could you talk a little bit about the training, the traditional training you had, and the pathway that led you to this particular position? Is it that it be a traditional entry into the world of art?
I don't know. I mean, I've just, I kept stepping off a cliff and catching myself on a branch at the last minute with these projects because I really didn't know how to do so many of the things I was doing, and I just learned to do them as I went along, how to draft, how to deal with legal contracts, how to solve drainage problems. My training in undergraduate and graduate school did not prepare me for what I've been doing. I mean, the bronze casting and marble carving had very little to do with the things that I've been involved in. But I think one of the things I love about what I'm doing is that I'm constantly in these areas that I don't know very much about and that I gain knowledge of, through doing them. People come to me and they say, I'd really like to do this kind of work. Do you think I should go to architecture school or should I, stay in art school? I never know what to answer because I see good things about both situations and things that aren't so good about both of them. So I guess you just invent your own education as you go along.
Other questions? Yes.
What happens to the pieces when they come down? Would you ever move them to another site, or is the site such an integral part that couldn't happen? I just wanted to say how much I admire you for staying in the question.
Staying in the question.
When a temporary piece comes down, can it have another life on another site?
Sometimes, but not often. I think the only ones that have really been able to do that are some of the interior pieces that I've worked on. The larger scale exterior works are really tied very specifically to the site always. The interior pieces that are doorways or windows or room dividers and things like that can really go into, a variety of situations.
And have.
Have.
Yes.
Mary, you're very articulate, and I appreciate your work, and I think it's very exciting. And the concept of going and working with an architect in a house is going beyond the 9 dots and continuing the exploration. Would you consider keeping a journal as to the process and how you get there doing the project?
No. It's like having, I don't know, it's just not natural to my way of thinking. Some people are journal keepers, and it's forcing me into something that I don't do easily. It's like somebody wanted to videotape during the process of building something once, and it nearly drove me crazy. And it's just that there's this, it's all of a sudden you have to be self-conscious about what you're doing, or somebody's watching you miss the nail when you're hammering or something. But it would be a good idea, but I doubt if it'll happen.
Yes.
Mary, you've showed us some very interesting projects and specific sites that you've worked on, and explained to us a little bit of your thought process and what goes into creating these sites or projects. Could you tell us a little bit about the people that approach you to create your work, what sort of expectations they have from you, and how the funding process is involved? In other words, why are they willing to take such a great risk to have you create something that they have no idea what it's going to be like in the end?
That's a good question.
Several good questions. The question is about the commission of pieces and who are the kinds of people who approach Mary, and really how does she work out the terms of those commissions?
I'm approached by a lot of different situations. People, somebody asking me about a house, somebody asking me to work on developing a master plan for Flushing Meadows Corona Park. In that case, it's like the Central Park Conservancy, it's the Flushing Meadows Corona Park Corporation that assists the park. So they're asking me to come in and work on this kind of project. Somebody might ask me to give them general advice about developing I don't know. It just varies so much from one day to the next what kind of thing might be suggested, the funding generally comes from an institution or an agency. It's sometimes percent for art. It's sometimes a private, less frequently a private organization
or
developer or something like that. But that has also happened. And so there's really no consistent way that it comes about. What does happen at this point is that I'm paid a fee for developing an idea, and then whoever is accepting that project, if they decide to go ahead with it, they are responsible for building it, having the funding to build it. But this is very different than what's happened traditionally with artists, where people are given $200,000 or something and asked to build a project, and if they've got some money left at the end, that's fine, and if they don't, it's fine. And I found that was really an impossible situation for me, because in building things, a project can be delayed for several years. The inflation, the cost of the materials is going up in that period of time, and yet there's no change in the fee, and there's no change in what people expect to have built, because they've commissioned you to do this thing that they approved 3 years ago. But their agencies haven't been able to sign off on it until just recently. So I ended up in the situation of always being in the red, so to speak. So I've had to separate myself out of that process. As far as what people expect, I think that the thing that's most important to me is that whoever I'm starting to work with, that I let them know in the beginning that they've got to be open about ideas. I'm open to discussion with them, but I would never go around and ask people, what they thought they wanted, because people's ideas of what they can have are so limited. And I'd like to find a way to give them more than they ever dreamed of. So it's a difficult thing, though, keeping it so that it remains open enough that that's possible.
Just one addenda to that. Mary has no gallery, no representation other than herself. She has a couple of studio assistants who help her. She receives fees for each of the projects that she does. She also makes drawings and studies which are available for sale. And they, once and again, sell. They're remarkable, precise documents, usually multi-layered, to give a sense of the development of the ideas. So those are some of the other additional ways that question might be asked or answered. I'd like to just conclude with one question. As all of us know, we're 1 week away from a very fateful election, an important election which will decide many things, a continuation or a change in our country. Mary has often been asked to speak on behalf of the NEA and to speak before the NEA and other visual arts panels in Washington. I'm now going to ask if she would sort of close this evening speaking her mind on ideas that she might evolve, generalizations that might evolve out of her sense of making art, the kinds of projects which we've seen tonight and that she's talked about, and ways that on a very national level, the issues of art and the movement of art truly into the culture, a truly public art to emerge, might actually be realized.
I think that's a very big question. I think that this is starting to come about in ways that, to an extent that I had never been able to imagine. At a certain point, I realized that it was impossible to go along as an individual, going out and getting my friends to help me and using every ounce of energy that I had to build these things. There had to be more to it than that. It couldn't just be a person here and a person there, that there had to be some kind of larger acknowledgement of this, of the possibilities of this kind of work. And it's over the past few years, that kind of support system has started to develop, particularly within the National Endowment for the Arts, and the vision that people like Richard Andrews, who had been until recently the head of the Visual Arts program, have brought to this. He was working with the person who was the head of the Design Arts program, Adele Chatfield Taylor, and all of this talk that people like me or Sia Armajani or Scott Burton or Nancy Holt or a number of other people, we'd spent a lot of time going around and talking about how important it was for artists and architects to begin to work together. And what was extremely important was to find Richard and Adele at the head of these two agencies within the National Endowment, actually starting to have programs that allowed that to happen, not just allowed it to happen, but really encouraged it to happen. These things have been, grants were being given for collaborative projects. The kind of new approaches to funding pieces in public spaces during the time that Richard was at the endowment have really been remarkable. I think they've started something which can't stop at this point. I think that the thing that we have to find out, though, is how to keep this going, how to allow this to keep expanding as it's doing. I mean, it's just like it's multiplying, even though it's not part of maybe the focus of every art forum. It's an area that is just developing with the most incredible speed. I think to me, as a sculptor, it's absolutely the most interesting area of investigation. I'm really prejudiced because I've spent all my time doing it, but there are so many possibilities. What we have to do is keep those possibilities open, to keep the bureaucracy from resting too heavily on all of this and making it too ordered. And but my hope is that it will continue to develop as it has recently.
Well, clearly, with your help, it will. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.